Greetings, my fellow electrifying artists. My favorite weather is thunder. My favorite way of building things in Cinema 4D is procedurally. So you know what time it is. It's time for procedural lightning in Cinema 4D, which I've finally found a way of doing that doesn't constantly crash, which is a big plus. So, basics of it is we're going to scatter points on a couple of objects and connect a spline between them and then make that spline look like lightning. Starting out, I've got a sphere as a source object. Lightning is going to come from the sphere and hit the target object, which is a landscape object. It can be any object though, it doesn't really matter. As long as it's got geometry, you can use this technique. So to start with, scattering points. Best thing to use for that is a matrix object. And you change it from grid to object mode, chuck your object into that, and there we go. Points scattered on the object. Now, it is tempting, if you just want one lightning strike, you would set the count to 1, but if you then change the seed, which we're going to want to do, it just does a weird sort of twitch on the surface and slowly moves across it. And we want to be able to have it jump around more like lightning jumps around. So if you set it to 2, you've still got that weird one that jitters and moves across the surface, but then you've got the second one as well that jumps around like a lunatic in a good way, the very best kind of lunatic. And he's the lunatic that we're going to be using. Call this one source matrix. So source matrix is referencing the sphere, and we need one to reference the landscape as well. So copy source matrix and call this one target matrix, because it's the matrix for our target. And reference the landscape. And now we've got points on the landscape as well. Let's just find a nice place to put that second lunatic of a point. That's a good spot. Now we need a spline to connect these points. So we'll go over here to the spline tool, spline pen. I think it's called the spline pen. Make 2 points anywhere, doesn't really matter. Can be any kind of spline really, because we are, and I don't want to scare you now, but we are going to use Xpresso to connect these points of the spline to the objects. Don't worry, it's going to be fine. It's going to be completely fine. You do not need to be afraid, because this is Xpresso for people who are slightly uncomfortable at the thought of using Xpresso. First of all, let's get neat and tidy. Make a null object, call it, well, lightning, I suppose, and put the lightning stuff in there. I'm going to leave the landscape and sphere outside of it. Then I will make an Xpresso tag under programming tags. There he is. And I will drag in source matrix, target matrix, and the spline. What we want is data from this matrix object to feed into points on the spline. So to get data from a motion graphics object, I reckon we go into motion graphics and use the data node. Which object? Asks the data node. Well, it's the source matrix. So we find the object node on the source matrix and we plug that object output into the object input on the data node. See? Not even slightly scary. But then, how do we get to the points on the spline? If only there was some sort of a node about points. Let's check in general and use a node called point. I reckon that's got something to do with points. But which object do we want the points from? Well, if we take the object input, drag it to the output of the spline, we can choose that as the object. And now we just need to move the data across from the matrix. And the data we want is position data. So let's check the outputs of the data node. We've got a position there. Let's use that one. Stick position into the point input. Oh, and look at that. There's an option for point position. And suddenly, if you see that in the background, one end of the spline, oh, another sphere's in the way, one end of the spline jumped straight to the point of the matrix object. Not the right point though, because this, if you remember, is the point that does the weird twitchy. So we go into the source matrix node in Xpresso so we go into the data node and change the index there, because the index controls which one of the clones or objects in your motion graphic thingy that it's taking data from. And I've only got 2, so that's index 0 or index 1. Now for the spline point node, we can just leave it at 0, because that's the first point of the spline. And then we just do the same for the other matrix object. We grab the data node, let's grab the point node as well. And let's link the object in the data node to the target matrix object. And we link the object on the point node to the spline object as well. Now, problem here, they're both referencing the same point on the spline, so that's not really going to do anything. But if we just change that to point index 1, it's using the other spline point. So now if we change the seeds of these, that jumps around and updates. Beautiful. It's kind of a bit like lightning. A little bit like lightning. Essentially, all we have to do now is make this very simple spline look like lightning. And that is a job for a nice little displacer. Actually, start with a big displacer, because I want this to move kind of large sweeping motions. So we check in our deformers and we look at each and every one of these over and over again until we find the displacer, which is there. And in this displacer, let's start by increasing the height a bit. Start at 100 centimeters maybe. So when we go into shading and choose what to displace with, a noise, we will see what it does. It does something weird. No worries though, we will fix that. We need more details on the spline. Right now it's adaptive and it just adds more point when the angle is over 5 degrees. And this doesn't really look like it's over 5 degrees anywhere. So let's just change that to uniform. So it's the evenly distributed points. And crank that point value. 400 points, please. Thank you very much. Now we can see some displacement happening. It's looking pretty okay, but I would prefer to use maybe displaced turbulence instead of standard noise for that displacer, just to give it a bit more variation in the details. And global scale way up. Yeah, maybe around 2000% scale. Just to give a nice overall shape to it. And now lightning moves, and ours doesn't move yet. But what we can do to make it move is, in our noise shader, we simply set animation speed to anything. Set it to 1, and then it starts wriggling like a funky worm. I'm going to set it quite low because this is the large displacement. I'm actually going to make that a little bit larger. Yeah, let's set it to 200. This is the large displacement, so I don't want it moving all that much, all that quickly. But I don't know if you can tell, this is still completely flat. If I crank it again, it is completely flat on this axis. It's just displacing along whatever axis it feels like, because the direction is set to vertex normal. So it just goes along the normals. If that even, does a spline have normals? I reckon it probably does. So it's displacing along that. And that's not what lightning looks like. To fix this, we change it from vertex normal to planar, and now it only displaces on the x-axis, which is also wrong, but it's fine, because if we simply copy this displacer and set it to displace only on the z-axis, now it displaces on both axes, so we get a 3-dimensional displacement. Displacement is way too high, so I'll put that back down to about 200. And on this second displacer, I will change the seed just so it's got its own unique displacement along the z. And now we got a 3-dimensional spline shape. Not done yet. Good step though towards making it look like lightning. This is going to be the large displacers, so I will change the name of them to large displacer. Now, you might be a bit ahead of me here and have figured out that that means I'm going to make small displacers. Yes, indeed. So we'll copy that displacer, call it small, still displace on the x-axis, and then I'll go into the noise shader of this one and just make it smaller. Now, what I also want to do is change the noise type, so it's not using displaced turbulence. What I like to use for very jittery fine displacement is FBM. That's a very detailed sort of noise. As you can see, it's a bit big maybe? I mean, it's way too displaced, so I'll turn that down. go into Object and set it to maybe 50? If even that, 30. 30 might do. Yeah, that'll do for now. That'll be our small displacement. And with it being small, I want the animation speed to be slightly higher, because now it's quite smooth and flowing, not very much like lightning at all. So animation speed 2, a bit more jittery in a nice way. And I'm also going to change the movement. That's quite a nice thing to do. If I set it to move on the y-axis, this third value here, just set that to 1, and then set the speed to maybe 2 as well. Now, disable these two so we can see what's happening. Disable the animation speed as well. You see that it seems to be moving in a sort of downward direction, which is nice because lightning sort of comes from above, doesn't it, and strikes down. Not technically, but it looks like it does. So if I add back on the animation speed and turn back on the other displacers, we got something that looks a bit more like lightning. Now I just need to displace it again on the z-axis for this. Change orientation to z-axis. And I'm going to give that its own unique seed as well. So this is what's going to be the lightning, essentially. But we do need to give it some volume. Because if we were to render it now, let's open up a little Redshift window. Yeah, it doesn't do anything. It's no visible lightning there. So the easiest way to make a spline have some actual solidity to it, you chuck it in to a sweep NURBS. Yes. And I'm going to use a circle to do that sweep NURBS. Now this looks, of course, all fucked up to begin with, because the circle is way too big. Set the radius to just 1, and suddenly, it's a bit dark here, but suddenly we have some volume to our lightning. It doesn't look good, but we can at least see it. That's step 1. Step 2 is making it look like lightning. For that, we need a lightning material. Create a new material. I'm going to call it lightning because that's what it's going to be. And in this material, it's just a regular Redshift material. I'm going to turn off everything except for emission, which is now called radiance. Bit of a shock for me when I opened the latest, but it's called radiance. I will crank that way up to something like 10. And I will remember to add that material to my lightning, and bada bing, that glows. And to make it look a bit more like lightning, I'll give it a slightly cool tone. Not that cool. Yeah. Maybe a little tinge of purple even. Yeah. Nice. That looks vaguely like lightning, and it sort of moves like lightning. One notable thing to remember is lightning isn't constantly on. It doesn't sort of begin to exist and then stays there indefinitely. It tends to sort of turn on and turn off, doesn't it? Kind of quick. It's almost as quick as lightning. You might even say. If you've been paying attention, you noticed I used displacers for pretty much everything. So let's use another displacer. First, let me put this into a null object. Again, keep it... Wait, where is the null object? Oh, there. Again, keep it nice and tidy. Call this one bolt, because this is the lightning bolt. And in that, I'm going to create a completely new displacer. Again, same technique as last time. Open up the list of deformers and you look for about 5 minutes and then you finally find the thing you were looking for. And this one, since our circle that's doing the sweep is exactly 1 centimeter, I will set the displacer to be -1 centimeter. So this is going to pinch this together once we add a noise to it. Now this time, I'm actually going to leave it as a normal sort of noise. I don't know if you could tell, but not much happened. And that is because the displacer is set to intensity centered. So it does displace, but it evens out the displacement. So it doesn't shrink and it doesn't grow. It just sort of averages around the position where it was. Change that, just set its intensity. And now this displacer pinches the lightning bolt we've got. Excellent. Getting there. This noise shader I'll leave as the default noise named noise, but I will make it a lot bigger. Instead of just 100, even just 1,000 I think might be too small. All right, I'll start really big, 8,000. It's huge, but that's fine. And then I'm going to go down to low clip and high clip and crunch the contrast of this noise. Now, if you're paying attention to the slight difference in size here, you can tell that it's pinching and it's expanding depending on how I crush these numbers. Now, to really make this visible, it needs to be a different seed, but you can tell how it sort of flickers on and off. To animate this, I'm not going to use the animation speed this time. I'm only going to use the movement because I want the lightning to strike from top to bottom. So I will set a 1 on the y-axis value, and the speed, I'll try quite high, maybe around 70. Now let's play it through, see what we've got so far. It's a sort of, lightning strike. And this low clip and high clip, that's going to control how frequent the lightning strikes. Now, lower values are going to be less frequent. Anything under, say, 30 is going to be very rare for lightning to strike. As you can tell, it's only very occasionally that it does anything. And if we crank it higher, it's going to be a lot more frequent until it's practically always on. Anything over sort of 60, you're getting in there to always on territory. So I like to leave it around, somewhere between 30 and 40 almost, just so it's an occasional flash of the lightning. Now, we do have a slight problem here in that lightning is sort of always on. It leaves a bit of like residual garbage in the air, which is kind of cool because lightning sort of does that, ionizes the air, turns oxygen and stuff into plasma, but this one is constantly on. And that doesn't really work for me. So to fix this garbage in the air situation, we will chuck this whole bolt into a volume builder. Now our spline that we are using, we know is at a max. We know it's 1 centimeter in radius. So if I start by just setting that to 1 centimeter, let's find a frame where there's actual lightning happening. Turn this off for a second. Right, there's a frame where there's definite lightning. So activate the volume builder and put that volume builder into a volume mesher. Now we have got the lightning happening, but only when there's actual lightning there. And other than that, there's a little bit of garbage in the air. Occasionally there's a bit of garbage. To fix that, you just go into the volume builder, you add yourself an SDF smooth, set it to something low like 5%. And that's also going to make sure when there's lightning, it's a little bit smoother in the details as well, if you like that sort of thing. Like might reduce some of the actual detail in the lightning, so we can reduce the voxel size to gain some of that back. And we've got a nice sharp bolt of lightning here, and this sharp bolt of lightning flashes occasionally, and in between, not much garbage happening. Now this is essentially it, and with this technique you can do all kinds of lightning strikes to your heart's little content. And it looks pretty good. However, it can be better. Simplest thing to do. In reality, lightning is additive. So when it crosses over itself in front of you, it is brighter at the points where it crosses. Simple way to do that in any renderer is turn down the opacity slightly. I'll set it to somewhere around 30%. And you can see it's now additive where it crosses over itself. And then compensate with a lot more radiance instead. So we get that brightness, and wherever it crosses over, it's got a bit of extra brightness to it. The second thing to really elevate this, branches. What would lightning be without branching? Kind of boring, usually. We're going to start with a smaller spline. I will copy the spline we do have and remove all the displacements from it, just for now. And then make it small. So I select all the points, move it to the center, and make it flat. Only set it to like 100 centimeters on a single axis. And there we have it. Now, I will drop this into a cloner object, and I will set that to object mode, the object in question being the spline of our bolt. Now I'm going to bias this slightly downwards because right now it's just all over the spline looking really strange. So I'm going to bias that by setting the start point a little bit lower, maybe around 70, 60, 70 somewhere. And I'm also going to increase the offset so I can increase the offset variation and get a bit of randomness there. And also uncheck loops so it doesn't start coming around the top again. Now, one problem we're having is that these clone right through the middle of the bolt. Not quite what we want. So again, I'll select spline, make sure I've got the point selected. And since it is 100 centimeters long, I will move that down by 50. So one of the edges of it sits right at the anchor point. So now it clones from that point and sits right on the main lightning bolt. I'll also uncheck the alignment like rain from a lightning strike. Now, of course, everything is better with a random effector. So I will create a random effector and I will make sure that only affects rotation, give it a little bit of a twist on the axes, and scale. Scale it by about 0.6 maybe, so we get it a bit random. Now let's copy only the small displacements back onto this one and put this into another sweep and give it a circle to sweep with. And let's make that circle smaller. And let's in fact make this half the size of the main bolt, so 0.5 centimeters. Now, the problem we're having here is that it only sweeps one of them, and that is because we need a connect object. Put it into one, turn off the weld because we don't need it, and sometimes it crashes everything. And then we can stick this also into the volume builder. Put it in null just for neatness, call it branches, and drop it underneath the SDF smooth. Now we have branching happening on our lightning strike. In fact, we could have a bit more branching. So if you want more branches, go to your cloner object, increase the number, and then you get more of them. Now, a problem we're having here is it looks fine now that it's, doing a lightning strike, but even when the lightning strike stops, we've still got our branching going on here. That's not very realistic. So what we need to do is copy this animated displacer into the branches null. And what we also need to do is change the height from -1 to -0.1. Otherwise, the splines turn inside out. But now that branching should flicker in sync with the rest of the lightning strike. And one final detail to do with the branches. Now, if we're going close enough, we can tell that these branches don't actually connect with the main bolt. They're slightly offset. Now that is because of these displacers. Slight effect, an effect nonetheless. But if we just add a spherical field to that, put that spherical field right in the center of our little spline that we're cloning, scale it down, you can tell that the field is only affecting the area within it. So if we just invert that, turn down the inner offset so it's a bit smoother. If we turn this on now, there's no displacement right at the tips of these ones, so they hit directly to the main bolt. So back on with the volume measure and volume builder, and we've got our branches nice and connected to that main bolt. Now, if you want even more branches, you could copy this cloner and reference the cloner within the cloner, but honestly, don't know how many branches you actually want. That's quite a few branches now. Now, one thing that's happening with our lightning strike here is that it keeps striking the same place over and over again. Now, I don't know about you, but I've heard something about how lightning doesn't actually do that. So to animate this in a nice lightning-like way, we're going to go back in to our matrices, open up this dope sheet by clicking the keyframe button here, go to the beginning, set a keyframe for the seed, jump to the end, and slightly increase the seed on both of these. So now, lightning is going to jump around from the source object to the target object, hopping along, striking here and there as it sees fit. And again, if we turn back on these volume measure objects, we get rid of that floaty garbage in the air. And what we're left with is something quite like lightning. Now, if you can't be bothered to go through all of these steps to set this up, that's perfectly fine. You can just download this exact file from my Patreon. Now, if you want a slightly fancier version with a bit more advanced Xpresso happening, I have a rig like that in my Patreon shop, where you can just click and drag, tweak a few settings to get the lightning just the way you want it. Now, Titan patrons, you get this whole scene file. where I not only have the Angel Ramiel folding out on itself and blowing the hell up, I also have an old version of the Lightning rig that I set up slightly differently, which has some benefits, but overall is a lot more crashy than this nicer rig. So yeah, you have fun with that. And to all of you, thank you for your time. And until next time, stay in motion.